And now, I am so proud to introduce our honorees because each personifies an aspect of JWA's work. I begin with Ruth Abram. When Ruth Abram founded the Tenement Museum in 1988, she said her goal was to honor American immigrants, to appreciate the diversity of backgrounds that make up the American experience, and to respect our common values. As the museum says, the thousands of immigrants who lived in these buildings all around us faced challenges we understand today, making a new life, working for a better future, starting a family with limited means. Today, the Tenement Museum tells the story of yesterday's immigrants. Many of them are grandparents and great-grandparents to thousands of people every year. The museum's programs reach out to today's immigrants by offering, for example, English as a second language classes to eager students who face waiting lists for the city's programs, and serves every day as an example of how learning yesterday's history makes us better able to understand and deal with today's challenges. The Jewish Women's Archive is so pleased to present our first Living the Legacy Award to Ruth J. Abram. Although I'm walking away with it, we're really going to box them up so that they can cover.
Sister Honorees and Lewis trustees, Gail Raymer, supporters, friends, and family. When I was a girl, growing up in Georgia in the 1950s, I dreamed only of marrying a prince whom I would love as much as I loved my daddy. Later, disturbed by my mother's sadness and believing it was related to her thwarted professional ambitions, I tried to imagine myself as what was then called a career woman. But looking around, I could plainly see that was impossible. For as far as I knew, there was no woman in my family or its large circle of friends who had ever had a career. No, it was obvious I would follow my mother and my grandmothers and my great-grandmothers in fashioning a life in which my sense of self and satisfaction would be derived solely from marriage and motherhood. And then one day, someone gave me the autobiography of Jane Addams, the founder of America's first settlement house. Here was a woman from a background similar to mine. Yet over a century before, Addams had charted a course unbridled by community expectation, and she had made a difference. I extended my hand, and Jane Addams lifted me up into a wider world. History had come to my rescue, offering a role model and inspiration where none existed in my limited sphere. In 1974, the leaders of over 100 national women's organizations of every stripe had personally signed on to a national women's agenda. The organizing effort had ground to a mysterious halt. Believing an explanation lay in history, I asked Gerda Lerner, the founder of the modern women's history movement, for a consultation. Surprised that an activist would consult her, she nevertheless agreed, and from her I learned that all national women's organizational efforts that had succeeded had started from the bottom up. We recalibrated the campaign to deal with the local organizations, and a year later were able to declare the existence of a national women's agenda. History had provided the strategy. Shortly after, the Kettering Foundation invited me to speak on the history of women to public school superintendents assembled in 4 regions of the country. And at every stop, I was met with hostility. At one, after introducing me with a dirty joke, The MC held a ringing alarm clock in my ear and threw a book over my notes, all to the delight of the audience. At another, as I stepped up to the podium, I was showered with spitballs and cries of, "Go home to your husband and children." At a third, I was awakened by a man who sneered, "I just wanted to see how a feminist sleeps." On the plane on the way to my last engagement, overcome with exhaustion and fear and doubt, I opened the biography of the Grimke sisters. These 19th century abolitionists had persevered even as buildings were burned around them. My building has not been burned, I said to myself. I can go on. And I did. History had offered comfort and perspective, as it has many times since. The Jewish Women's Archive is a unique source for role models, strategy, inspiration, comfort, and perspective. And according to Ellen Boyson-Nevitt, even more. Ellen's grandmother, Annie Sprinsock, died twice. Once at 34, when Ellen's father was a boy, and again when he refused ever to talk about his mother with her grandchildren. In the Jewish Women's Archive, Ellen learned that her grandmother had survived the Triangle Fire and had indeed hoisted a sister worker above her head in the elevator, which carried them both to safety. Suddenly, the melancholy, secretive, passive ghost of a grandmother was transformed into flesh and bones, a worker, a doer, a woman of great strength, a character, a hero. The history of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire is also fraught with important lessons for today. For instance, there were Jews on all sides of the story, as workers, as union organizers, as financial backers of the strikers, as progressive reformers, and also as factory owners and their lawyers, as strike busters, and probably as hired thugs. History offers us role models for both what we should do and what we shouldn't do, who we want to be and who we don't want to be, and both are vital for our growth. Second, reminded that immigrants alike, says historian David Drayle, with the spirit of progress, impatient with the weight of tradition, hungry for improvement in a new land and a new century, founded our union movement. We are moved then to ask, what changes do contemporary immigrants imagine that we can't yet see for ourselves? Third, when the most vulnerable take action, leaders follow. 2 years before the Triangle Fire, the Cooper Union stage was dripping with stars of the union and socialist movements, all advising caution when Clara Limnick, a young, unknown immigrant seamstress, pushed her way through. "I have," she said, "no further patience for talk, as I am one who feels and suffers from the things pictured. I move we go on a general strike now." The resulting strike won higher wages, a shorter work week, recognition of the union as a bargaining agent, clear rules, and overtime pay. It did not result in safer working environments, for that had not even been requested. Which brings us to another lesson. History is not clear-cut. The stories, like life, are complex and contradictory. Our heroes and heroines are flawed. Our villains often lovable at some level. Having started as workers in a dark and filthy tenement sweatshop, like those depicted at the Tenement Museum, Triangle factory owners Max Blank and Ira Harris were rightfully proud of their gleaming factory with its huge windows filled with light and electrically supplied machines. They know of what they spoke when they asserted that the workers never had it so good. Had they thought the factory unsafe, the owners would not have placed their offices there. And on the day of the fire, Max Blank would not have invited his 2 young daughters to visit him in his office there. And it wasn't as if the factory was in violation of safety laws. There were no laws to speak of. Those would come as a response to the fire. And as the fire progressed, Harris, who with blank had financed and organized physical attacks on the women involved in union campaigns, personally led many workers out of the building to safety. Only by admitting and plumbing history's complexities can we find solutions for current problems. We need our history to advance. Certainly, while important progress has been made, we have a long way to go to bring equity to the organized Jewish community, which continues to lag in developing female leaders. Unless we change our beliefs, said Schiffer Brocknick, about what a leader looks like and behaves and about how work is structured and caregiving commitments are met, we will not create equity in leadership. However, to effect those changes and others, we need our history. We need to know how earlier women and men structured their lives so that we can be both fiercely ambitious and deeply caring, and so that together we may author our future. Gathering that history is well suited to the Jewish Women Archive. We can all participate in the process of historical recovery. We can and should record our history for our children and grandchildren, providing them with the models, strategies, comfort, perspective, inspiration, sense of whom we should and should not emulate, that only history can offer and that family history can do particularly well. We can support writing and recording and organizing of history, and of course we should support the Jewish Women's Archives. I am deeply gratified by this honor. Thank you.